radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
Good evening, everyone. Fade to Black. How you doing? Today's Monday, August 14th, 2023. Let's do this, man. I'm ready for tonight's show. I made an announcement earlier today during the news, and I do want to share this with everyone because it's great. Every night I start off the show and I say, help support our team, help support Fade to Black and everything that we do here. And I don't do this alone, and you can do it by getting a Fade to Black t-shirt. And the links are below. I announced earlier today a sneak preview. Everything is out now. We have a brand new official Fade or Not t-shirt. And the classic isn't going away. It's still there. If you don't have a classic, you can get it. But check out the new one, which is hand-drawn by world-famous comic artist Michael Avon Oeming. And you can check it out now. The links are below. And there's still two ways to get it. You can order it right off of the website. And you can get a Game Changer membership. Either way, you can get your Fade to Black t-shirt and help support the show. Everything is autographed. Shipping is included. What more can you ask for? Check it out. Be the first to get the new Fade to Black t-shirts. The links are below. All right. Tonight, Peter Ells joins us. I have called this show tonight Mind, Quantum, and Free Will. Three of my favorite subjects. And tonight we're going to be covering all of that. We're going to discuss why the mind-body problem is so important. We're going to talk about free will, and it is a fact. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about another favorite subject of mine, why physicists need to study philosophy. We're also going to do a deep dive into the quantum, but it's so great to have Peter Ells on with us because you hear me every night. These are my opinions, but I express all of these every single night. And tonight we're going to be doing all three and much more. He has a long-standing interest in the hard problem of consciousness, specifically in explaining, in a matter of compatible with science, the facts that we have qualitative experiences, such as pains or the taste of wine, and are moreover, free agents. He has given talks at international quantum mind conferences in Tucson, Arizona, and Salzburg, Austria. This May, he gave a talk describing pan-idealism. What is that? We're going to be talking about that, which is the subject of his latest book. And we're going to talk about the hard problem at the Science of Consciousness International Conference held in Taormina, Sicily. All right. He lives in Oxford, by the way. I just told him I'm going to be in England next week. His website is below. The links are there. They're over on our website and throughout social media. And I would like to welcome for the first time. Man, that was a long bio, Mr. Ells.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. And I'm going to be over in the UK next week. Now, before we get started, you get the first-time guest disclaimer. That's right. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. Already, Peter's like, what? A disclaimer? Peter, it's this. It's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends. But we're going to end as friends. There you go. You just have to accept.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Accept?
That sounds good to me. Yes.
That's a political. Are you a politician? That's a political way of saying yes.
Yeah. No, I'm not a politician at all. I'm glad to say.
The mind body problem. I kind of want to start there, but we're not going to. We're actually, because I think that's getting ahead of our skis in this conversation tonight. There is a question that I ask nearly every guest on this show, and it always centers around consciousness. And I am trying to figure that out, just like everybody else, right? But what do you think? Where do you think a consciousness originates? Is it part of the physical? Is it a chemistry thing? Or does it exist outside of the physical?
No, I think it's more fundamental than the physical. I think you can derive the physical world from the mental world. About 100% of scientists and kind of 99.9% of philosophers are materialists. They think they have to reduce everything down to the physical, and somehow mind arises from that. But in fact, nobody's been successful in giving an account of consciousness or experiences such as pain in terms of physical goings on. Nobody's giving a convincing attempt. And it's fairly easy to show that if materialism is true, if everything boils down to physics, then free will is impossible. And I think that's so unlikely. It's better to reject physicalism, the idea that everything is grounded in physics, and accept that we do have free will. I take that to be a fundamental fact.
No, we're gonna circle back to free will.
Yeah.
But because it's such a heavy subject and it needs to be discussed. And I have an open mind, right? I ponder. I trip out on everything, man. I'm just so into it. But here is where, when I look at the world of science, and we've come a long way in the world of science, and I have a conundrum, and this is the conundrum. I believe that free will, and it's a great song by Rush, by the way. So free will, let's put that in front of us. And then we have the particles of the universe that attract, combine, and do things. And so if there is, and follow me on this, if everything is going to attract and combine and create things, stars, planets, right? Gravity, right? And elements, hydrogen, oxygen, right? Helium. If all of these things happen, then it seems logical to me that they would have a way of doing things that you couldn't stop. So, if that is the case, then that means maybe I'm kind of a determinist. But I can't be a determinist and see ghosts, right? And I can't be a determinist and believe in free will, right? And it's kind of, is there a way? Is there a happy medium in the middle? Is there a combination of both? Because right now they're two extremes, aren't they? They're just as far apart as they can be. And I'm a walking conundrum.
Right. Well, free will is incompatible with determinism. And most materialists would say it's also incompatible with randomness. They would say, even if there were random goings on in my brain, electrons moving one way or another, or nerves firing at random, that wouldn't help us having free will. But in my scheme of things, free will and will is the only form of causation in the universe, and that physical laws they don't have the power of laws. They're not like judicial laws or anything like that, or laws from God. They are merely descriptive of the interactive wills, if you like, of the components of my brain. And so free will is more basic than randomness, and the randomness is merely a description of free will.
Yeah, and okay, and so you made a decision, a free will decision, to come on this show tonight, right?
Yes.
Right. Or you feel that
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So and I'm okay with that. But if we back all of that up and we look at the stages behind that, there was a whole chain of events that had to occur before you could make that decision.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yes.
And so there are those out there, those determinists, those materialists, those reductionists, right? that would say you think I knew that you were going to think that, right?
Yes.
and what do we do about that? And how do we convince? How do we understand that we do have free will?
Well, I think even science becomes more easy to understand if we do accept that we have free will. Scientists choose which experiments to perform, and it's important for them to be able to do that freely. And another thing is, I'm trying to think, but I've lost my thread for a moment. That
well, let me
yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, let me help you with that. Every time I hear, especially two physicists, right, or two even non-spiritualists, I think is the best way to put it. Not all physicists. It's that square can be a rectangle, rectangle can't be a square kind of argument. Not all physicists are non-spiritual, but most are.
Yes.
But when you get two of them together and they have this discussion about free will, they start cracking jokes. Oh, of course you were going to say that.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew, and that is a fundamental part of their basis of not only life and their outlook on life, but how their life will end here too as well. Everything is so definite and black and white. But when I hear their arguments about this, it's kind of convincing, where I step back and go, maybe my free will is determined. I just feel that I made there's a very convincing point. I don't agree with it, but they lay it out pretty well.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I'm going to say is not directly into reply to what you're saying, but it's related. Even though I do believe we have genuine free will, it's not arbitrary. There are limits to our free will. And also, each of us has free will, and our wills can act in competition with one another. So we don't have perfect free will. There are very serious limits to our free will. But our free will is certainly, in my view, not zero.
Right. Give me an example of that.
Well, okay, think about America going to the moon. Was that something kind of predetermined by the Big Bang and all the specific accidents and random fluctuations of molecules since the Big Bang? Or was it because people acted for certain reasons? You know, people had ambitions and made decisions to go
Dreams.
to the
Right.
moon and were able to put them into effect. And it's hard to take seriously the idea that this didn't involve some agency, human agency. And again, going against what you said, your previous comment, even scientists, even though they may joke about free will because they can't kind of defend it logically according to their picture of the world, when they're kind of at home with their families and playing with their kids, or, you know, in their everyday lives, they act as though they have free will and they behave as though they have free will. It is something impossible to kind of maintain consistently that
Is
you're
it that? And I know I just interrupted you, but let's stay on this point because I think, and I'm not being cavalier. Okay, I may sound like I'm cracking a joke, but I'm not. You're absolutely right, but they can't admit that moment of free will to their fans, right? To those that purchase the books, to those that have a closed down mindset. They can't do that, right? They can't even like brush up against it, and they will never admit to the free will decision that their kids made between a vanilla and chocolate shake. That's a free will decision, right? But and they know that they participated in it. They purchased that. They purchased their free will decision that their kids made at the ice cream shop.
Yeah.
But they won't admit that in public. They know it in their mind, but they can't admit it. They're forced into it.
Yeah. And the problem that most physicalists, most materialists have is putting free will in and making it consistent with the rest of their ideas. And that is very, very difficult to do. You have to change a lot of your ideas and change the basis of your thinking before free will makes any sense. And I've kind of gone through that process. And once you accept the idea that everything is grounded in mind, then it becomes open that we have free will and agency, but not before you take that step. And that step is a number of steps kind of down the road of getting a consistent system. I mean, another important thing for my book is that the ideas I develop must be consistent with current day physics, you know, to the best of my ability. And you can kind of talk philosophically and have these vague ideas, but unless you can demonstrate that they're consistent with modern day physics, then you're quite rightly, you're not going to be taken seriously. And you have to take a number of steps from the conventional position before you can reach a new position, which is consistent in itself and also consistent with us having free will and with contemporary physics. And that's what I believe I've achieved anyway.
At what point does consciousness come into play? It's an interesting concept just in a basic question like that. At what point do we become ourselves and we have the ability to do what we're doing right now, having a conversation?
Okay.
Yeah. At what point does that become? Because a physicist, or those in the hard sciences, will tell you that not everyone, but in a general sense, that there's a little piece of consciousness in every particle, right? And you amass enough particles together, and you've got 3 pounds of gray blob in between your ears, and consciousness evolves from those particles massing together. Well, let's back up for a second. When electrons and gravity and force comes into play, and particles do start to combine, there's no free will there. They are being attracted to each other. They're not thinking that they want to do this. So I'm not so sure if there is consciousness at that point, but it does appear at some time. When do you think consciousness arises?
Yeah, you have to distinguish between consciousness and the ability to think. And the ability to think only arises in kind of higher animals, like apes and
dogs,
ourselves.
cats.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But certainly I do take the position that even though they can't think, even things like electrons have minds. They can perceive their surroundings, and they can act freely on those percepts. They behave in a very stereotypical way, which is why we can have physical laws. But certainly they can. There's evidence that they can perceive the entirety of their surroundings. I mean, there are two things in this from quantum physics that actually help with the idea that electrons, say, could be have this kind of very simple consciousness. And one of them is that you put an electron into an experimental setup, and it might involve the electron kind of having to go all possible routes through this apparatus. And there's this thing called superposition, where it seems to go through all possible routes, and the results depend on the entirety of the experimental setup, even though you would think it could only go one way. And so that's a kind of sensory thing, if you like, that the electron can sense the entirety of its surroundings. I mean, Richard Feynman, who certainly wasn't a panpsychist and didn't believe this, but he certainly made the analogy that electrons can kind of sniff out. He actually used the word sniff out, I believe, the entirety of the experimental setup.
Yeah, the path. And and what I always found interesting about that, Feynman and others have never taken it, at least publicly, taken it to the next step. What if in the experiment you had multiple electrons, more than one, and would they choose different paths, right, to get to the same result at the end? Would there be some type of conscious decision? One takes a left turn and makes the wrong move, right, and one makes the right move, but they both have the same starting point. And here's I've thought about that quite a bit. Here's a piece of quartz. Okay, here's a piece of quartz. And then I could flake off, right? So this is particles combine together and quartz is created. All right. I can scratch my skin, and now I've got skin cells underneath my fingernails, right? But are these individual skin cells, right? With everything in there, it's got mitochondria, it's got a little DNA action going on, right? Right here. Are those individual cells on my body, are those conscious? Are the individual particles in this piece of quartz conscious? Is there something here? You can't. I think that the argument is can't really be made. It's either one or the other, right? Unless consciousness exists outside of the physical, then the questions are answered and we can move on.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say outside of the physical. I would say it's more fundamental that what exists at the basic level is centers of consciousness of more or less complexity with their percepts and their agency. That's what exists basically. And then you derive physics from that. So it's not like the physics exists and mind is somehow external to the physics. What exists basically are these minds, mostly very simple, and from them you kind of synthesize the physics of the world. So that's the way it goes.
Yeah, I understand that. But here's the problem that I have with that, and I would love to hear your answer. If it is all derived in a fundamental position, and atoms are atoms, particles are particles, electrons are electrons, and electromagnetic, everything is all fundamental and the same, then we would all like pepperoni pizza, right? Everybody would have the same tastes. Everybody would have the same desires of odor. Everybody would have the same appreciation of music, and there wouldn't be any variety. And that's why I'm more comfortable in thinking that consciousness exists outside of the physical, and that's what makes us all individuals.
Right. So would you be something like a Cartesian dualist? Do you know what I mean? That physics is one thing and mind is something different, and your mind interacts with your body.
That is an easier thing to understand in the complexities of this than trying to force it into the world of the quantum. And I'll tell you why. That's why physicists don't want to mess with this. They can't measure it, right? They can't see it. They can't observe it. And because of that, and we can look, to gluons and quarks and string theory and the very smallest of the small, right? The microest of the micro. It's an impressive thing, but we can't get to consciousness. We can't see it. We can't feel it. So that's why I'm more comfortable in determining in a deterministic way that we may never figure that out because we're not supposed to.
Well, I don't think you can explain consciousness from within physics. Certainly, I don't believe that's true. And in fact, the kind of interpretations of quantum mechanics that I prefer are what they call quantum mechanics without observers. It's where you have a complete physics of the world without any mention of consciousness. Now, there are physicalists who kind of believe that, but they think that somehow conscious minds, can somehow be synthesized out of the interaction of these particles, if you like, particularly within human brains.
Mm-hmm.
They say that it's some sort of behavior, with complex behavior within the human brain is identical to consciousness. I don't believe that can be done. My sort of contrary opinion is that mind shouldn't be appear in the physics, because physics should be determined by mind. So you have mind at the ground level, and you explain physics in terms of mind. You get the you have to go into enough detail that you get standard physics defined in terms of mind. I mean,
Yeah, that's a brilliant way to put it.
One of the ways you can see that this must be true, even though you don't get the details, is that our only access through with the physical world is through our experiences. You know, I have the experience of seeing my laptop in front of me, and I have an experience of seeing an image of you on my laptop. But anything, even the most direct thing, you know, like my watch here that I'm holding in my hand, I can never get to the watch itself. It's only through my experiences. And so experiences are primary. There's no such thing as direct contact with an objective world. It only comes to us through our experiences. And you can kind of leverage this idea to define physics in terms of mental goings on. Now, one of the difficulties of this, this general type of idea is called idealism, that you take mind as fundamental and define everything in terms of the minds of humans, or perhaps a few animals like cats and dogs. That gives you a very thin physics. It doesn't tell you what's going on the other side of the moon or in the middle of the sun. And so that's where another idea, and you refer to it, that everything has this tiny bit of consciousness, not necessarily the ability to think, but the ability to perceive and have agency, have a certain freedom to act. Provided you have like things everywhere, you can build up a physics everywhere throughout the universe, rather than have a kind of gappy physics that you would get if only humans and certain animals were minds. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And the audience has heard me mention this many times, but I'm going to bring it up here because it's so important. In Brian Greene's latest book, Until the End of Time, it's a great book. I've read it dozens of times. Okay. He's a great mind. He's a great physicist, and he's well respected. But he crosses the red line on consciousness in the end of the book without saying consciousness. Okay. And this is how he does it. And this is in direct response to your statement right there. Okay. This is what he says. I'm paraphrasing. 100 trillion years in the future. Okay. This is the end of the book. It's called Until the End of Time right now. He's at the end of everything. 100 trillion years in the future. And everything has ended. Particles have come apart, right? Weak and strong forces no longer exist. Particles have come apart. There's nothing left. That's it. That's it. There's no light. There's no this. There's everything has come unglued. Okay. He says the only thing left at the end of time is thought. Think about that statement. So, and he says, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but all that's left in the vastness of nothing are clouds of thinking. That thinking and thought will continue. He doesn't say consciousness, right? He won't, but he says thinking and thought.
Yes.
And I thought that that's a very open way of trying to discuss this very sensitive issue, number one. And number two, it sort of explains the Big Bang. And it sort of explains, right? If you have a big cloud, he said, thinking will continue. All the memories will still exist. Everything is still there, right? And it's floating around. And then another Big Bang happens, right? Some other accident, another universe is created. There's a cloud of thought there. What came first, the chicken or the egg? And the process is wash, rinse, repeat. Now, when you hear Brian Greene say something like that, what goes through your mind? Is he trying to discuss consciousness in a non-confrontational way? What is thinking, and how would it exist after everything ends?
Right. I'm not sure how that links to consciousness. I know there are other people who've taken a kind of similar direction to me, but they say that the entire cosmos is the kind of ground of consciousness, and that individual minds are kind of I don't know what you call them, but subunits within this kind of cosmic mind. So his ideas would reverberate with that. But another thing I've thought of is that Professor Roger Penrose, who actually won the Nobel Prize recently for his work on gravitational waves and is extremely eminent. He actually has a similar idea to the author you mentioned, that you have a succession of universes, and once one universe kind of reaches the end of the line and it kind of peters out, then something happens with time. You've got nothing to mention time with, and so somehow if you measure time in terms of events, even an eternity of kind of nothingness is like a brief instant of time, and you get another big bang somehow. And I do know that in his theory, you can find traces of the experimental traces of previous universes in the kind of echoes of the Big Bang. So you've got this 3-degree above absolute zero microwave background that's kind of more or less the same in all directions wherever you look with a radio telescope, and that's kind of the echo of the Big Bang, and that's one of the things that prove that the Big Bang exists. But it isn't perfectly homogeneous. It isn't perfectly the same in all directions.
It's also not the same temperature in all directions.
Yeah. And he he discovered kind of, if you look closely at the data, you can see vague ring-like structures. And he argues that this is an echo of the kind of earlier universe, if you like. So it's not a big bang out of nothing. It's a succession of universes. So I don't know enough to go into the exact details, but certainly what I've said is an accurate description.
Yeah, Penrose, out of all of those cats, right? He's one of the most respected, and I've got many of his books. And I will finish a book of his. No, wait a minute. Let me back up. I'll finish a page of a book, right? And I'll go, okay, yeah, I'm getting it. Roger, I'm getting it. No, I'm not. He has a way. He's got a very open mind, by the way. Roger he's extraordinary, and I like the way that he presents. The word I want to use is ponder. I overuse it too much, but he actually thinks outside of the box.
Yeah,
and I think that's a problem with most physicists today. Is they stay in their lane too often, and they don't go outside of their lanes for a lot of different reasons, funding being a main one. But Penrose, when it comes to these ideas, yes, I think that he has an open mind. And where we are right now today, it seems, especially in the last couple of months, the Big Bang itself is now starting to come into question. And I find that very interesting, where I understand that science is a long string of corrections, right? That's all it is.
Yes.
If you're a physicist today and you've developed something, you're going to be proven wrong at some point. And like every physicist in the past, right? That's what science is all about. What do you think that the Big Bang is the start? That's the zero, and the question I think now that everybody wants to know is, well, okay, but what happened before the Big Bang? What was there before the Big Bang? Certainly, there was something there. There wasn't nothing, and it's an interesting turn of science, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've no idea. I mean, certainly Roger Penrose's idea has certain attractions, that we're kind of one of a succession of universes, and but I know Roger Penrose actually was one of when Stephen Hawking wrote his doctoral thesis. Roger Penrose was one of the examiners for Stephen Hawking's doctoral thesis. And later on, Stephen Hawking had a different idea, which is that when you consider time, it's like time has an arrow, it's kind of vector field, and all the vectors more or less line up. That all the arrows are pointing in the same direction. But Stephen Hawking had this idea, when you go back to the Big Bang, right at the very first instant, you can't line all these arrows up. And he had the idea that the arrow of time was kind of chaotic at the very first instant of the Big Bang. So you had time going in different directions very nearby. I mean, I don't understand it, but that's another kind of possibility for the very, very early universe.
You always know when a physicist is getting up there in years, because then they start talking about time. Then they start talking about consciousness. Then they might even talk about time travel, right? They don't have those constraints anymore. I met Stephen Hawking.
Oh, right.
And
I didn't know that.
I did. And so when he's in his wheelchair, he's got that TV, the computer, right? He's got the
Yes.
screen right in front of him. And I'm standing next to him. I'm taking a selfie. He can't stop me, right? So I'm taking a selfie. And he says on the screen, and I never even saw him move, by the way. So I don't know how he did this. But he says on the screen, he says, "Are you a cop?" And it was great. Anyway, so did when Penrose and others, certainly Brian Greene, when they talk about these times, the age of where we are now, which is 13.8 billion years, right?
Yeah.
The alleged age. Let's just go there. 13.8 billion years. But if we're talking, trillions of years, and 100 or 1,000 trillion, these ginormously big numbers, and our sun is only going to last for 10 billion years.
Yeah.
So how small of a blip we can't wrap our head around what kind of time that we are talking about. And Penrose addresses this, right?
Yeah.
That we are talking about ginormous, huge, expansive spaces of time with gaps in the middle that are also, we're talking about hundreds of trillions of years. I mean, it's mind-boggling when Earth is only 4.5 billion years old.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's certain other things. You mentioned, I think, time travel and the possibility of time travel. Stephen Hawking, one of his early books, he wrote a book with a guy called George Ellis. It was called The Large-Scale Structure of Space-Time. And in general relativity, you have this curved space-time, and you can treat it as a geometric object. But you can also do because of that, you can do a kind of cut and paste job to glue it together in different ways and get time-like loops. So this book is horrendously mathematical. But it's all about chopping up the universe in various ways and kind of cutting it and pasting it together.
Do you think that can we stay right here for a second? The analysis of general and the extrapolation of the ideas behind a time loop. Do you think that Einstein was specifically thinking about that? Was thinking about a time loop? And a time loop is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's time that runs like this and comes back to its starting point, right? Okay, so it's a time loop. Do you think that that's what he was visualizing and that was his intention? Or do you think that that was the interpretation of the math?
I think that was probably the interpretation of the math, which came later. Einstein, or in any general relativity model, you're very much simplifying the physics of the universe. You're assuming it's a kind of uniform dust or gas. You might be able to add in some sort of magnetic or electrical field, but you have to do that kind of ad hoc as an extra. But you generally treat the universe as at a given time, at a given cosmic time, as being uniform. And of course, the universe is very far from being universe. We look out at the night sky and you can see stars and galaxies. It's very lumpy with kind of vast distances of vacuum in between. So the model is necessarily very simplified.
Well, he did a few things that I'm not sure that today, especially with what we have learned lately, that he wouldn't have approached it the same way. And one of them is the speed of light being definite. Okay. Or today, I think it's a pretty general accepted idea that that light has different speeds throughout the universe. It's affected by all kinds of things. It could be faster than it is. It could be slower. And so the figure that we have for the speed of light now has to be exactly the same in all equations. Otherwise, it's a jumbled mess. You have to have something consistent. And that's the interesting part, that the speed, there is nothing definite in the universe. I think everything is different everywhere.
I'm not sure I would agree with that. I mean, certainly light, when it's traveling through a material, it does slow down if it's going through a fluid, say, but in a vacuum, it is a constant, and you have really excellent evidence for that.
I'm not, and that's where, that's an interesting point, which is exactly my point, right? That we have to have something consistent and right there. So the speed of light is blah, right? But with gravitational waves, masses changing, bending light and curving light, as well as the electromagnetic changes that are happening. We have dark matter and dark energy occurring that light is passing through. We have planets and galaxies at the edge of the observable universe exceeding the speed of light in the expansion of the universe. So no, that's where it comes for me. I don't think anything is consistent. I think that time and gravity and light in different parts of the universe and in different worlds are just as different and varied as anything else.
I don't know. You have to have some things consistent. If you didn't have any kind of set point, you wouldn't be able to do science at all.
That's what I said. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
Peter. That's the whole
point. Right.
That's
okay.
the whole point. You have to, otherwise the math makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
If the speed of light is different everywhere, then suddenly we can't keep satellites in orbit.
Yeah.
Right. And everything else. We would have never made it to the moon.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about dark energy and dark matter. I mean, they seem to me to be just placeholders among physicists to kind of express their ignorance at the moment. I mean, maybe they will come to detect dark energy or dark matter at some point in the future, but at the moment it seems just a name for something that's not understood at all, really.
They need to have an explanation. They need to have it is a placeholder. They have to have something to fill in the blanks.
Yes.
And if we go back, to me, I think one of the key years in all of this is 1922. 1922, and it's 100 years ago, right? Only one lifetime ago. That's when Edwin Hubble made the observation here at Mount Wilson Observatory, his 100-inch telescope, which was the biggest in the world at the time. And he sees blue shift, right? He sees redshift. And holy crap, the universe isn't static.
Yeah.
Remember, Einstein said we live in a static universe. Einstein didn't believe that anything was moving. And it took 6 years until 1928 for Edwin Hubble to get that paper published, that the universe was expanding.
Yeah.
And to find out that it's not only the theory was it was going to expand, slow down, stop, and then turn around and compress back onto itself.
Yeah.
And now we know that is not the case. It's forever expanding, and it's increasing. I mean, it's increasing quickly.
Yeah.
And it's increasing faster than we originally thought in 1998.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's interesting you mentioned this about ARP and the background radiation. Hubble and the expansion of the universe, because I work in a museum, history of science museum, not in an academic job, but we've got one of Einstein's blackboard in there. And he came to Oxford in 1931, and he was explaining the expansion of the universe according to his general theory of relativity. And so he's got, right at the top left, he's got Hubble's equation, Hubble's law, and he's kind of using that and explaining the geometry of the universe. And the bottom line is an approximation, a very rough approximation, just the nearest power of 10 of the age of the universe. And he put it between 10 billion years and 100 billion years. So, there are enormous error bars in his calculations, but it was a kind of right ballpark figure. So it's just interesting. You're near Hubble, and then I'm near the blackboard with Einstein explaining Hubble.
Yeah, I can see Mount Wilson from my backyard.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Literally, I can point at it.
Yeah, and I've only seen photographs, and there's always pictures of Hubble smoking his pipe and looking through his long refracting telescope and taking the photographic plates, and but it was very much disputed even for quite some time afterwards. There was some guy who I forget, as an astronomer, who pointed out that there were certain galaxies which were very close to one another, where they had very different redshifts. And then there was a big argument about whether this expansion of the universe idea was completely wrong, or whether it was just coincidence that these two galaxies at very different distances happened to be lined up with one another.
This is where, for me, things get really confusing. Oh, by the way, the best photograph, right, is the one with Hubble with his pipe and Einstein looking in the telescope like this.
Oh, right. I haven't seen that one. No.
Yeah. It's Einstein's like, okay, I got to rethink things. But that's one of my favorite photographs. Here's where that point, which was this came out later, but that there isn't a central point that everything in the universe is moving away from something else.
No, that's right.
Yeah, that can't be. I mean, out of my mind, if the Big Bang happened, then wouldn't that go in all directions and continue? And if everything is moving away from each other, then how come this is, I mean, for me, how is it that we're about to combine with another galaxy in 100 billion years?
Yeah.
How are we headed towards each other when everything is supposed to be expanding and heading away from each other.
Yeah, but the expansion only happens on a vast scale. It only happens at the scale when everything can be taken to be uniform. When you've got, say, us and the Andromeda galaxy or the local group, that is a very small scale compared with the scale of the universe. And so there's significant, if you like, each galaxy is a significant lump of matter, and because of the gravitational attraction between them, that's why they can approach each other.
But why isn't there? Okay, but here's the man. You know what? I don't even want to take a commercial break tonight. We're just going to keep going. This is where dark matter and dark energy, not dark matter, where dark energy comes into play, where it doesn't make any sense. All right. Now, I agree that it's just a placeholder. We can't see it, we can't touch it, but something is pushing out this way. But we have strong and weak forces. We have what's going on at the atomic level with electrons and quarks and gluons, right? And muons. We have that. And then, so the extreme micro and quantum out to the macro, where the moon is gravitationally locked with Earth. Earth is gravitationally locked with the sun. The sun is gravitationally locked. Our solar system is gravitationally, and then we become a ring in the Milky Way, and then the Milky Way's got its spirals, and then at the center we have a black hole. Those are all different forms of gravity. Otherwise, our Milky Way would spin apart, right? And that's the trippy thing. So where is the dark energy in between Andromeda and the Milky Way? Why is there an absence of dark energy there? And why is there an absence of dark energy in different parts of the universe? It doesn't make any sense.
No, I don't know enough about that at all, really.
Right.
Okay. I was going to go on to a new topic, or a couple of new topics.
Sure. Well,
one is defending Einstein. Einstein, among the lay public, has an absolute genius reputation in all areas of physics. Like he's as the greatest physicist ever. But amongst quantum physicists, he is a rather neglected and even kind of vilified or condescended to person who many quantum physicists kind of look down on him and say he couldn't accept the theory because he was kind of past it and kind of hidebound in his ways. But in fact, he made many more discoveries in quantum physics that the most physics of his contemporaries who despised him did. And he kind of discovered a new fact about the universe, which is that of entanglement and non-locality. And those facts are very important. Schrödinger described entanglement as the key fact of quantum mechanics. So he's very underrated among quantum physicists, and his reputation is only now being kind of salvaged. And in my book, where I discuss physics, I kind of go into the history. I refer to the original papers and kind of explain why he was vilified and how unjust it was. Anyway.
Why do you can we stay there for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Why is it that physicists, doesn't matter, astro, quantum, whatever version of physics you're dealing with, why are they always into the soap opera? Those guys really go at it. And you think about, you go back to Niels Bohr or that period, Feynman and Wheeler and Oppenheimer and Fermi, those cats would go at it, man. And I never quite figured that out. It's like a sewing circle on a Saturday afternoon.
Well, it's I would take exactly the opposite analogy to a sewing circle, because I think it's kind of, physics is kind of, although it's often presented as a disinterested and calm and rational look for the truth, very often it's a kind of testosterone laden
Yes. Right. Yeah. That's where the
it's
sewing
like
circle.
a couple of drunks outside of a bar, really.
That's a better way to put it.
Up on
Yeah, it's a better way to put it. Sewing circle is being too mild. But yeah, when we look at things, not only through that period, with Feynman and Wheeler and Bohr and Einstein and Oppenheimer and Fermi and these great minds, right? Teller, the list goes on and on. Today, string theory and those that string theory was such a, what's the word I want to use? Fad? Is fad the right word? Yeah. We can use fad for it. 20, 30 years ago, it started to take hold about 40 years ago, the ideas behind it. And superposition is another. Just if you take a really close look at this, it is, you're right, testosterone might be a really good way. Why is it you're supposed to be calm, cool, collected, black and white, pragmatic, and you guys are all supposed to get along, and they don't? But
no.
Is it because they're too smart? Are they too nerdy? They don't have, what's the word? They don't have the gregarious gene. They don't know how to get along. I don't know.
Well, I kind of got a big beef with Niels Bohr because of his interpretation. He was very good at giving a kind of instrumentalist idea of quantum mechanics, how to do the calculations and how to get results. But he was absolutely against. He said, we can't understand what's going on at the quantum level. But then the really objectionable thing he said that was, we shouldn't even try to understand. Scientists shouldn't even try to understand what's going on at the quantum level. And if they attempted to do this, they were doing philosophy and making a big mistake. And that was a real bad influence on quantum mechanics for many, many years.
That's such a great point. And I'm not the only one with this opinion, but I look, if we go back to Isaac Newton and we look at the man himself, he was religious, he was a biblical scholar, right? He was into the dark arts, right? The guy was an alchemist, right? Mathematician, physicist. His math that dealt with gravity is what we use today to keep stuff from crashing into this planet. It's how we get to Mars, right? But he was like the last of those Renaissance minds. the physicists today, if you did take a look at philosophy or into Hermeticism or into some of these other, you might actually learn something.
Mhm.
There is something to looking at all angles.
Yeah.
There's something to that. And I think Isaac was like the last of his generation. Today, you can't get a physicist to talk philosophy. No, you just can't do it. How do we make this happen? How do we affect change?
Well, there are some really good philosophers who know some scientists, some science, up and coming, and they have kind of achieved a moderate reputation, and I think the physicists are gradually opening up, and I think students are naturally curious. You know, they want to know what the equations actually mean, what is actually going on. And so I think the students will eventually push back from this idea that we don't understand things, or we're not meant to understand things. I mean, one of my great heroes is a guy called John Stuart Bell, and he was the one famous for Bell's inequality, and he took Schrodinger's idea of entanglement and actually gave it a form where it could be put to an experimental test. He was actually a superb philosopher as well as being a wonderful scientist, but he was still slightly sniffy about philosophy. But what he was doing, he said, I want to do science with professionalism. What he meant was he wanted to have an understanding of what was going on in the quantum world. And he was actually doing really excellent philosophy in his works. He was also an extremely witty writer. I mean, some of his papers, you know, you laugh out loud at some of his attitudes and kind of pulling down some of the more arrogant physicists. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because your answer will lead to the next question. When my time is done on Earth, right?
Mm.
Do I cease? Do I just become my part of evolution? And that's it? I become, you know, I feed the dirt
Yeah.
and allow something else to live after me? Or is there something next? What's your position?
Okay. My position, I do have religious beliefs, but I don't myself believe in an afterlife. I I think we are finite creatures, and when we die, well, the way I would put it would be that the sophisticated structures, the minds that we are, kind of disintegrate into, you know, back to the atoms and molecules, going back to the soil, as you say.
Mhm.
It would take something extraordinary and something extra to have any sort of afterlife. And I don't see the value or use of any sort of afterlife anyway. If you look at if you like the traditional versions of heaven or hell, I don't like either of them. My only preference for heaven over hell is I don't particularly like being tortured or burnt, but it would just to spend eternity singing the praises of God, if you like, would be just so tedious. And I can't imagine my life being prolonged forever doing anything fruitful, if you like. I think it's in general, not that we consider it from our individual point of view, but from the point of view of our species, it's good that we're finite beings. Otherwise, the ecological crisis will be even worse than it is today. But also that new generations can come over and kind of develop the work we're doing and kind of build on the ideas and thoughts we've had. And so I'm not too disturbed by the idea of not having an afterlife. I don't see any afterlife as anything that I would enjoy for a very long time anyway.
Okay,
And
so what? Yeah, you talking about you, Peter. You would be the most spiritual person in the world when the plane's going down. But let me say this.
no, I'd be screaming and you know,
oh man,
just with everyone else.
Please let there be a heaven. Please let there be a heaven. But anyway, but this is where it gets a little funky for me. Have you ever seen a ghost?
No, I haven't. No.
What would you do if you saw one? What would you do if you saw a ghost? I don't think I've seen a ghost. I live in a haunted house, but have I seen? No, I haven't. And I think I would lose my mind if I did. But I believe in ghosts. I believe that that there has to be an interdimensional aspect to the universe. It answers so many things. And so when we talk about ET or what may be visiting this planet, which is a huge discussion right now in Washington, D.C., and we just had hearings on UFOs, and it's a crazy moment in history here where our government is telling us that UFOs are real, right? Okay, so, but how do they get from there to here? It's in direct contrast with Einstein and the speed of light, number one. Number two, that you have the Fermi paradox. And then number three, you have entanglement, or you have two particles affecting each other on both sides of the universe. And the multiverse and 11 dimensions and everything else that physics is trying to tell us today. In that, if any of this is real, and I believe that most of it is, I think that they're all connected. So we have the interdimensional aspect. We have craft that are getting here at the speed of now, not at the speed of light. It's at the speed of now. I don't know how they're doing it, but which takes us to probably the most important point of all of this. If you, right now, in a mechanical sense, and you needed to travel Fermi paradox style to Alpha Centauri, it's 4.5 light years away, right? How would you get there without dying? Well, you wouldn't. You would die of old age. But if you could get your mind onto a chipset, robot, whatever, you can then pilot that craft forever. So that is immortality, and that is living forever, and that may be the afterlife that you're referring to. Your mind would be active for 1,000,000 years. And that's where I'm at with this, and I just think that with all the other discussions that are going on, these are serious, deep, existential, philosophical things that we have to consider. How do you keep your mind active for 1,000,000 years if you're living on a chip? Same thing. Consciousness, your soul. Peter Ells is living in the head of an android robot forever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like forever.
Okay. Well, even though I think everything is grounded in mind, I don't think you can put human minds onto computer chips. If you like standard computer chips, they're like conventional computers. They're like Turing machines. They have a clock. Essentially, they have a clock, which is something vibrating very quickly. They have lots of switches, and but all their behavior of these chips can be explained at that level of the clocks and the switches. You needn't go below that to the quantum level. Beneath that, you needn't go to a higher level to the functionality of the chip and say there's any consciousness there. I don't believe that you can put a human consciousness on a chip.
Well, why not? Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Well,
Okay. Let me give you if there is a tiny piece of consciousness, and this is not my idea, it's not my theory. If there's a little piece of consciousness, very small, in every particle, and you've got 1 trillion receptors in the human brain, and you put together a server farm with a bunch of computers, and you have those 1 trillion connections, all of those ones and zeros working, all those yeses and nos that you're referring to, right? Mm-hmm. If you put all of that together, is that enough consciousness in those endpoints of that server farm to create a conscious situation? Well, physicists say yes, and that the computers would come alive, and maybe the internet right now is saying, yeah, Jimmy, you're absolutely right. I am alive. But so yeah, it's kind of hard to argue that point.
Okay, well, one thing we haven't discussed yet enough really is entanglement, and I think entanglement plays an important part in the workings of the human brain. You can't think of the human brain as being individual particles. You have to consider it as being as an entangled system, and what that means is you can't treat each particle of my brain as having an individual state and then combining these individual states to give the state of my brain.
Correct.
you have to, for the entangled system, you have to
affect them all at the same time,
yeah.
which is what I'm doing with you. I'm entangled with you. I made you ask that question. I'm just kidding.
Oh, right. Okay. But
Yes, you're right about that. You're 100% correct. The rotation or whatever, the position, whatever you want to call the state of those particles would all have to at the same time.
Yeah. And the thing about an entanglement is it's not particles, individual particles being coordinated. It's like it's one system, one object, which kind of manifests itself
I love
as
that.
being these particles. So you would you have to take that into account. So I believe you could kind of build a duplicate of my brain. I mean, there are problems with making quantum duplicates anyway, but if we ignore that for a moment, but by making a quantum system, which is one entangled whole, it would be possible to make a system with consciousness. Yeah, but it would be essentially, it would be essential that it's a quantum system. It's not reducible to classical computing.
Would it have your sense of humor?
I don't think I have one. So that seems...
I knew I'd make you laugh. Okay, so you love chocolate ice cream. Would that new quantum entangled duplicate have those same wants and desires? And would your memories transfer?
Yeah, well, let's say you could do that. I mean, there are problems with duplicating a quantum system anyway. But if we put that aside, let's say you could do that and you could get a reasonable facsimile with my beliefs and desires. It wouldn't have free will, at least initially, because it wouldn't have a genuine free history. It would just be this blob created in a lab that happened to be a duplicate of me. So if you like, it would certainly inherit my kind of preferences for certain flavors of ice cream, but it would only develop its own free will after kind of living for an extended period of time within the world. You'd have to provide it with a body and everything, and it would have to make its own decisions and learn from its mistakes and so on. So it would have to gradually develop this history of decisions and what they call self-forming actions before it developed free will, genuine free will in its own right.
How long would it take? Is it the same thing as, from the day you're born to the day that you graduate high school or whatever, you turn 18, is it going to take that long to develop to turn into a young adult, or is it quicker?
Well, I think kind of society recognizes it around the world. You have the age of criminal responsibility,
right,
which probably in some countries it might be as young as 7. In some countries it might be as old as 21, but somewhere in between, in the teens for most countries. And that kind of reflects the idea that until you reach a certain age and a certain amount of interaction with the world, you don't have enough experience of making choices and making good or bad choices and seeing the consequences of those choices to actually have responsibility for your actions. I mean, there's one kind of anomaly in America that if a child commits a particular heinous crime, then they're tried as an adult, which I don't think it makes much sense to the rest of the world, because we think criminal responsibility means your ability to make decisions and free decisions and conscious decisions and knowing the consequences.
I'm
So
still doing that at the age of 60.
yeah,
I think I
okay.
should be tried as a child. I'm still
All right.
I'm still
Yeah.
making bad decisions. I wanted to ask you this. Are we alone in the universe, or is there we know now that just in our Milky Way, we have more than a trillion planets. A trillion. 20 years ago, the answer was 0. We hadn't even found an exoplanet yet, right? Yeah. And now we know that every single star has at least one planet in our Milky Way. There's 500 billion stars. Avi Loeb told me, it's over a trillion. We've got over a trillion planets, which the number that they're throwing around is like, 100 billion Earth-like planets in the Goldilocks zone. That's a crazy, that means just in our Milky Way, which is a tiny speck of sand in the universe, right? Just a tiny little, our Milky Way is teeming with. How much life do you think is out there? Or are we the only ones?
Yeah. The difficulty of making an exact calculation is because we're a sample size of 1, if you like, but we can only take the sample size given the fact that we're living unconscious anyway. And so we're not only a sample size of 1, but we're a kind of biased sample size, if you like. We couldn't even ask the question if we didn't exist. So it's hard to calculate the odds, but even given that, I would believe there is life elsewhere in the universe, but I think it might be, it is possible that it might not exist, but I think it's likely that it does exist, but we can't tell how sparse or how rich it is.
You haven't seen a UFO yet, have you?
No.
Yeah. You would definitely. It's a paradigm shift. It's a life-changing event when you see something that is not from here. And once that happens, I remember my first. I've seen a few. I've probably seen a lot, but I've seen a few that were absolutely crazy town, extraordinarily ridiculous, redunculous, and that's it. But I remember like the first time when I saw something like really crazy, and it wasn't that long ago. Man, this stuff is real. I'd always believed in it, like in a religious use of the word belief. Right, I believed in it in a religion. I mean, like, I wanted to believe. I believed in something I couldn't see and never witnessed. But when you see it, when you witness, it's a whole nother thing. Yeah, it's a very strange thing. It will change. It will change you. But what do you make of this change in conversation today? If we go back, I'm talking about with the government, with Washington, D.C., with Congress, with the Senate, the Department of Defense, the Navy, the CIA, the NSA, the ODNI, witnesses being called in front of Congress to discuss. We are in a strange situation right now. What do you make of that? And how will the world change once all of this is completely accepted. I think everybody is kind of nonchalant about it. Like, what, okay, whatever. Well, of course we're not alone. What do you think?
I don't know. If we're ever visited by aliens, then I think we will be in real trouble.
Why?
Because I don't think they would have any reason for treating us with any particular respect or consider us to be beings with any particular intelligence. I haven't studied the evidence that aliens have visited us, but so I can't really comment. But
why would, but why wouldn't, if we take certain things in this theory as fact, okay, we have to accept a few things. So let's accept a couple of things, and then we'll get to the question. If there is an extraterrestrial civilization, an ETC out there that can arrive on this planet, then we can accept as fact that they are more advanced than us because they can get here, right? Okay.
yes.
So we would have to accept that. They are definitely smarter than you and I. You and I can fake it pretty well, but they would definitely be smarter than us. But then we would also have to assume that they evolved to get to that point, that they went through the same things that we did. They invented fire, right?
Yeah.
They discovered fire. They went through a Stone Age. They had comedy and music and math and teaching and law and philosophy, right? Maybe they had a Plato and a Socrates, and they went through all the evolutionary stages I think that we would have to assume all of that. So if they get here, they would have to be able to see themselves and understand that they were once like us. So I don't think that they would look down on us. I think that they would appreciate where we are and that we survived this far and haven't blown ourselves up yet.
Yeah. I mean, certainly any alien civilization that managed to come here, they would have to go through that stage where they could have destroyed themselves very easily, and they would have had to have gotten through that and made it to the stage where they were sufficiently civilized that they could develop this technology,
I think they would be enlightened, that they would have moved past bullets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Killing and murder and hate and all of that they would evolve past all of that. And that's just my take. But we are doing the same things here. We are slowly growing up. I wish it would happen a little faster sometimes, but the witnesses that appeared in front of Congress took an oath. Right, this was 4 weeks ago, right here in the United States, Capitol Hill, House Committee. Right. One of the witnesses who worked for a couple of intelligence agencies, also worked in the military, also served in Afghanistan. All right. He was part of the UAP task force. His name's David Grush, by the way. So he swore, took an oath, and said to Congress that the United States government is in possession of flying saucers. Imagine somebody going into Parliament in London, right? All of those MPs going, "Yep, MI6, they got flying saucers. Yeah. I'll tell you where they are." That's what he did. And why would somebody go under oath, swear to tell the truth on national TV, I might add, and say these things? And if you're lying, you've ruined your career. If you're telling the truth, you've ruined your career, right? It's either way. But that's where we are today. I think it's an extraordinary moment of humanity when these are the discussions that we are having in a public forum.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I can add anything useful to that debate. I mean, it would be interesting to see how it looks a few years down the line.
That's the only way. That's the only answer. That's the
Yeah.
only answer. No, you answered correctly. But there isn't another way to look at this except for move to the future, look back, and see where we're at.
Yeah.
That's the only way to resolve any of this.
Yeah. I'm very skeptical about things. I'll tell you a few stories. Like in the late 50s, when everyone was getting excited about the space race, we used to get kind of little plastic astronauts in with our cornflakes. As a kid, I never believed it would happen, that we would get to the moon. And even after the early Apollo flights, you know, I never believed that would happen either. And I think, you know, we started to believe it when we saw some early space flights just orbiting the Earth, the Apollos. But then there was this enormous step with Apollo 8 going round the moon. And then I stayed up with my parents watching, you know, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing on the moon. And the pictures were so bad, I can see why some people think it's all a conspiracy theory. On Apollo 12, which was the next one flight, my father's an amateur astronomer. We had a telescope in his back garden, and we actually saw part of the Apollo en route to the moon. And I don't know if you remember, you have the command and service module right at the very front of the spacecraft.
Mm-hmm.
You had the lunar lander, the lunar module, which was kind of stowed behind under these 4 covers, and then the rest of the spacecraft behind. And shortly after it set off for the moon, what they had to do, they have to separate the command and lunar module. The covers blow away, and then the spacecraft has to turn around, pick up the lunar module, and then they set off for the moon. And we actually saw this through my father's telescope.
That's crazy town.
12.
But you saw the command module turn around to the service module.
Oh, no, we didn't see the turning around, but we saw the things. Well, so we saw 3 dots in line that kind of drifted further and further apart. So one was had just after it picked up the lunar module, and then there was another dot which was the booster, which I think it was either set to crash into the moon because its job was done with, or orbit the sun. That's what they used to do. And there was an oxygen cloud which looked like a fuzzy star. But my father noticed there were these 3 flashing lights, and he couldn't work out what it was at first of all. But then I realized what it was. It was these, you know, these covers which covered the lunar module. They were kind of blown away, and they were kind of spinning at random, and they have a kind of random shape anyway. And so they were catching the sunlight and flashing in the sunlight. And so we saw all that going on. So that was a big highlight of my time. But the other thing I want to mention is where I'm very cynical about things is the Webb Space Telescope. I was very cynical about that because the launch get put off and being put off and again. I think it was kind of delayed for about 2 years, and it's a very complicated thing. And I either thought it would either blow up on the launch pad or it wouldn't deploy properly, and if everything didn't go perfectly, then it would be useless. But eventually it did. And so I was very thrilled once it had happened, but I was very cynical until they actually managed to do it.
Isn't it amazing how we can peer into the atmosphere of exoplanets that are 1,000,000 light years away, 1,000 light years away? And most people don't understand. They hear 10 light years. It's right next door. No, that's a lot of miles, man.
Yes, yeah.
It's and to be able to look into the atmosphere of those planets and know what they are made of. It's unbelievable. That's where we are technically today. I want to circle back to your comment though. And I'm gonna, Peter, we've got to have you back. There's like 50 things that we didn't touch upon tonight, and but it's been an amazing conversation. Here is where, to me, math comes into play when it comes to life. Let's just deal with our Milky Way for a second. Just our Milky, not the universe. The universe, it's too big of a number. There's all kinds of life out there, a lot of it. But particles are limited. There's not infinite types of particles. And they can only combine in so many different ways. That is also very limited. It's a very limited number. So if you have a deck of cards and you shuffle those cards and you deal playing poker with 5 friends and you deal it out, how many times do you have to shuffle before you deal out an identical hand to everybody? Well, that's what science is. It's all probabilities. It will happen. It could happen on the next hand. It could happen 10 million hands from now, right? But it will happen. And it's the same thing with particles. And it's the same thing with how DNA is made up. Particles only combine so many different ways. And the Milky Way is a very big place. There are duplicates of you and I out there, maybe to the infinite. Duplicates. Duplicates. There's a Peter Ells out there that likes chocolate ice cream with 10 digits behind it. Right? That's it. There cannot be another way to look at it. That's why, in my opinion, asteroids like Bennu carry all the basic sugars of amino acids, which are the fundamental ingredients of RNA, and it's surviving in the vacuum of space, and it's being dropped off on planets all over, everywhere. And so, I think that ET would look at us, and they would be very similar to who we are. It's a numbers game. Yeah, it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
So, well, that's where I'm at with it. That's why in radio that's called dead air.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, in radio, but see, I see the wheels are turning though. See, I can see you, and when we have these conversations about ET visiting us today, these are stories that go back thousands of years, way before Steven Spielberg made Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This conversation's been going on for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And I just think that today we're ready for that news, and it's coming at us full force. It's from the media, it's from witnesses, it's from data, telemetry, and sensor data, and we're about to have a disclosure. And this is where physicists. This was all about entanglement, by the way. This is where physicists and their conversations about entanglement, I think, really come into play. That's ET would have a firm grasp of that and understand how to utilize entanglement. They would understand what quantum computers not only can do, but how they can be built efficiently. They would understand all of these things. It was science fiction last year, but it's part of our reality today. And any advanced species out there would understand that.
Yeah.
I think entanglement is how they communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you about space travel. I mean, do you think human beings should try to travel this solar system and try to reach planets around other stars, or do you think it should all be automatic systems?
Well, eventually we have to blow this popsicle stand. We can't stay here forever. Right. So we know that in about 1 billion years, as fusion starts to freak out in our sun, helium and hydrogen start to replace themselves, and the gravity changes. The sun's going to expand. And when it does, in about 1 billion years, it's going to touch Earth. It's going to grow that big, right? It's going to touch. We can't be here when that happens.
No.
In fact, we will have been long gone by that point. We will be traveling. So the short answer is we have to. I think it's going to be fun to do and to get to that point. But eventually we have to leave Earth. We can't. No, we can't. There isn't any planets here that would survive that. And then you know what happened 100 million years after that, the sun's going to shrink. It's just, and think about the release of gravity. So even if Earth is left, it'll be a cinder block. But say Jupiter, Neptune, Uranus, Mars might survive. But any of those outer planets, they may be released. Right? The sun won't have the mass and the gravity to keep those planets in orbit. They just may spin out and disappear. So we can't stay here. That's it. Not even on another planet in our star system. Yeah, we're gonna have to go somewhere else. Yeah, we need to start thinking about that now. I think that's one of the things. I think it's a philosophical point that all physicists and astrophysicists need to consider, is that what would bring this planet together? Knowing that we have to go. We have to leave as Earthlings. We can't leave as American citizens on one ship, right? Russians on another ship. No, we have to leave. We have to unite and consider the future of humanity, not of different races and religions and countries. No, I think that it would be something that would unite all of us. And it's like our next phase of evolution, Peter. That's right. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, certainly, even the very limited space exploration we've done already, I think that really does bring countries together. Like when the Americans landed on the moon, I think people almost everywhere celebrated to a huge extent. It wasn't seen as a nationalistic thing, even though it was kind of motivated by the Cold War, if you like. And like even the India and China kind of getting to the moon and doing research on the moon. I think that's a thoroughly good thing. But I think we need both types of exploration, because the certainly like unmanned exploration is very much cheaper, and it's at an incredible sophistication now. You know, the way the scientists based on Earth can control these automatic space vehicles and landers is so incredibly impressive. And also you can conduct, you know, you're talking about how common life is in the universe. You can conduct automatic searches for life within the solar system, say on the moons of Jupiter or elsewhere, and they're best done automatically, because you don't want to kind of contaminate the biology of any life you might find there. So
Well,
I think
I think that's how you would do it, though. The von Neumann probe, right? And that idea behind it, which is you would have a self-replicating, you know, drone system. You would land a 3D printer factory on an asteroid, right? You get the resources from the asteroid and you're cranking them out. You're downloading some simple software, and off the probes go, and they go to the next set of asteroids, discover planets, replicate themselves. And that's how you would do it. I absolutely think that is the way to go. When we get to Mars, which is going to be hopefully probably in the next 10 years, but I think we're going to do this on the moon, and we'll do this on Mars. So we're going to 3D print. See, it used to be, how did we consider, how are we going to get all those resources to the moon to build the moon base? How are we going to get all the resources to Mars to build the dome cities? Well, no, now we know. We 3D print that stuff.
Yeah.
That's it. You send a little 3D printer and you get to work. And that's how, I think that's how you would eventually map out the Milky Way and the rest of the universe and discover things as self-replicating situations where you manufacture these on the fly. We're not shooting them off of Earth. We manufacture as we go along, and they're sending information back to us. So I think that's how, we're on the verge of that now. I mean, we are right there. We have the technology to do it. And, you know, Elon Musk is probably got this in the planning stages right now, I would think. Yeah, I think that's where we are. What a great conversation tonight, Peter. Where can everybody go find your stuff?
You can buy my books on Amazon. I think that's probably the easiest way. But I think you've probably got some links down below. I didn't have a look in case I messed the broadcast up, the link here. But certainly my books are on Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got pan-idealism.com up on the website and also in the description box below and on social media.
Yeah,
Thank
you'll
you so
find
much.
a link there.
And I'll be in England. All that stuff is going to go down in about 6 days. So very excited to come over and hang out with you guys.
Okay, thanks very much.
I'll talk to you, Peter. Thank you so much, my friend.
Okay, thank you.
That was an amazing conversation. I want to thank Peter Ells for not only staying up late, early for him, late for us, but just a great conversation tonight. We just scratched the surface, and I look forward to Peter being back on with us. What are we doing tomorrow night? Tomorrow night, let me see. I will tell everybody in just about 2 seconds. Oh, tomorrow night, Riz Verk. is back with us. And Riz, one of our favorite guests, good friend, Riz will be talking about, are we living in a giant video game? That's what we're going to, the simulation hypothesis. He's written a couple of books about that, but we're going to go a little bit deeper than that tomorrow night. That's right. Riz Verk is back with us. That's tomorrow night. And then Wednesday night, Timothy Alberino is with us. We're going to be talking about the alien invasion going on down in Peru. That is Wednesday night. And then Thursday night, first time guest, she is here. This is for real. Kim Carlsberg, right here on Fade to Black. Oh, hold on for a second. Let me do this and bring this up right here. And where is my music? Oh, there it is. See, there you go. A new console. I don't know what's going on anymore. I want to thank everybody. Don't forget, get your new Fade to Black t-shirts. The links are below. Fade to Black is produced by Hill J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you to Dennis and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJ Sierra for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2023 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Until tomorrow night with Riz Verk. That's right, Riz Verk from MIT. Tomorrow night right here on Fade to Black. I want everybody to be safe. Go back, Lee Tepe.